Hi, this is Mark News from Plant Talk Radio. Thanks for subscribing and listening to our podcast, Your Gardening Questions from Plant Talk Radio. If you have a gardening question you'd like our host Fred Howard to answer, send him an email. The email address is fred@planttalkradio.com. Now for today's question. This brings up an interesting question. You were talking about shade-tolerant shrubs. How much shade... At what point do you have to start looking for a shade-tolerant shrub?
Okay.
How much sunlight does a normal plant need?
All right. Well, Bert's question was posed in that I think he said he gets 2 hours of sun in the morning and then it's all shade from there. That's when you really should be moving toward shade-oriented plants, especially if it's morning sun. Morning sun is beautiful, and it is definitely a good growing time where it's cool and et cetera, et cetera. But at 2 hours, that's where any of the plants of the week would work. It's where shade-type perennials, shade-type shrubs would be almost a mandate. And then 2 to 4 hours, we can start to say, okay, got to be careful with our selection. Some considerable number of those, the hydrangea, the viburnums, and all, depending on what you're looking for in size, those would handle the 4 hour period quite nicely. Then we get into the 6 hour period of sun, and I'm looking at this in reverse right now, but at the same time, 6 hours of sun starts to constitute a whole day of sun. To explain that, I've even grown roses in what we'll call shade. There was a big old tree, one of our first apartments, east exposure. I took some scraggly roses home that the boss just practically insisted I should take free. Practically. Now, he was a little scotchy, but at the same, well, now I can get in trouble saying that. But anyhow, let's just say they were scrubs. And I planted them, gave them a really decent burial. I mean, soil improvement and broke up the soil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this was in mid-May or even a little later. Those plants were flowering terrifically at 4 feet tall in the fall. Now, these were hybrid teas. They had only morning sun, and that was one of their advantages. I would say probably 4 or 5 hours of good significant sun first thing in the morning, and then shade in the afternoon. And that gave them a chance to slow down in growth, store some food, not use it all up in respiration and so on. And those plants just absolutely were delighted to be taken home in that case. I drove back by that apartment some years later, and 3 of the 5 were still... They weren't looking too good, but they were still there. And this is where this light management thing is a little tricky. But let's just say anytime you have 6 or 8 hours of sun, which would be morning, midday, afternoon, and evening, you have to be a little careful with that afternoon and evening, because that's the burning hot sun. That's the same time your skin gets, well, let's just say in trouble. 10 to 2, I think, is the period of time where the light intensity is so extreme. So you have to make a little judgment there. But 2 hours and under, definitely shade. 2 to 4, kind of on that margin where hydrangeas and rhododendron and things should thrive. That my rhododendron, again, I have only 3, but I proved that they will grow. No, my boys, when they were eating out of my refrigerator, proved that you can grow those things in the northern end of Columbus in clay soil. They excavated the bed, and they prepared the soil, and they planted 3 rhododendrons, a pieris, and several other, well, azalea, and so on. Those plants, well, my boys are now in their 50s, and they remember doing it. So it's at least 35 years ago, and they're still flourishing because they get no direct sun, lots of good light, and then, of course, acid and loam and so on and so forth. So all of those things have to be taken into consideration, Mark. But I hope that little bit of a 2 hour, 4 hour, 6 hour, and then anything beyond 6 hours is considered full sun. That takes into a day of a plant's growth in terms of what it really has to have.
And as you have talked about in your own situation, in your own lawn, things change, and as the trees start to grow, the light situation changes.
Well, I have destroyed all real estate statistics. I think 4.7 years is one of the figures I've heard. Let's just make it 5 or 6 years in any one home, and then people usually move on, up or out or whatever the case may be. I have defied that. It's 41 years now, coming into 42 years of gardening the same spot. Mark, when we moved in, there wasn't any place except the north side of the garage that didn't burn. Right. I mean, it was sun from morning till night. Well, you could get a sunburn just mowing for 40 minutes. My lot was so bright. Well, now, with having put happily the right plant in the right place for the most part, and then doing some thinning, as time let things grow and they started to pinch each other, certain plants were put in a spot where they could be selected to stay there. Anyhow, I would have to hunt for any area in my yard that gets 6 hours of sun. There would be several small patches, but I still have good bright illumination. The oak tree has been limbed up to a proper height out front, so I get good light under it, grow a lawn quite nicely. Backyard has a honey locust light pattern of shade for two purposes. One, the negative first. The little bitty leaflets, when they fall on the ground and your foot is wet, you can track those babies clear through your house, and it's a little aggravating when you do that. But I like to sit under a light, airy tree. I don't need something that causes me to think it's another total ceiling. I want to see up through. So anyhow, my lot in 40 years is a complete changeover from brilliant burning sun to now at least 60-70% shade. Mm-hmm.
Hey, thanks again for listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our other podcasts as well, the Plant of the Week podcast and the Plant Talk Radio podcast, all on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to sponsor a daily podcast, contact us at fred@planttalkradio.com. To find out more about Fred Hauer and Plant Talk Radio, visit our website, planttalkradio.com.
Circle270media.com